That's slavery by another name. That is
That
free
is still
labor
the
in its
prison
infancy,
pipeline.
the 13th Amendment, and so we're looking at, and I think we can be honest enough to see the world through adult lenses of there are people who are highly invested at creating more and more money for their shareholders through any means necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And what that's had a result of is realizing slavery is a very lucrative business. And so when it was outlawed, how can it be rebranded so that it's legalized again?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Books and Backbone podcast. My name's Donna Harris. I'm the owner of Bookkeeping Made Simple, just outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. And with me today is June Johnson of Collective High. Hello, June. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Hi, well, thank you so much for having me here today. This means a lot. My name is June Johnson, and I am the founder of Collective High, which is a private networking space for like-minded individuals who are interested in breaking the stigma around cannabis usage. And so kind of like a Soho House, but with cannabis consumption. It's designed for founders, philanthropists, revolutionaries, thought providers, tastemakers alike, just as a space to be able to consume, but also learn about cannabis through empowering event programming that really connects consumption with intention. And so that's why I created Collective High. Now it's in its fourth year scaling up, and it's really exciting to see people really
That's
grasping
awesome.
the concept. Thank you.
That's awesome. So, what are some of the stigmas that you've encountered around cannabis, and how are you counteracting them?
Right. So, I mean, there's so many stigmas. And one of the talks that I really love giving is a talk about the history of cannabis, because when you see the history, you kind of understand where some of the stigma came into play and how that connects with politics, as per usual, and history, as always. And so, a lot of the stigma comes from more recent times, actually, because cannabis has a history of dating back to 10,000 BC. The first law on books about cannabis in the United States was that every farmer had to grow hemp because it was deemed so essential back in 1635. So we had this long history of using, appreciating cannabis. The stigma around it really came in around the 1900s, especially around the Mexican Revolution. Immigration had a sharp hold on part of the understanding we have around how this stigma came into play. And then different laws were put on the books to really make cannabis illegal for even just having a small amount on you. You could go away for life. So that's really where a lot of the stigma came in, and it still has a drastic effect today. You have films like Reefer Madness, which have really paved the way for a lot of people's understanding around cannabis and what it can do. And so part of my work, or all of my work, really goes into advocacy for those who have been harmed by this, propaganda, all the way to, the war on drugs and things like that. And the other part is making people just aware of what cannabis does and doesn't do in the system, and how to approach it from an educated and empowered stance.
That's awesome. I'm always baffled at the people that have these ideas about cannabis, but they've never used it. They've never seen it. They don't know who among their friend group even uses it.
Yeah.
Because everybody I know that uses it are top performers. They are the best in their fields,
Yeah.
and they
The
love it.
Yeah, and I think that's really where, both of my businesses around cannabis come into play. Collective High and the Weed Doula is really getting a lot of people who are already using it to feel more comfortable using it and not feel like they're a bad person for turning to it for pain or sleep help or libido or anything that they're turning to cannabis for. And so much of that, like I said, has really come into play around these like harmful laws that are put on the books, a lot of blue laws that were put on the books around it, and shaping the perception and connotation around the same time you had the alcohol prohibition. Cannabis started really booming in this
Right.
country. And so, then that's when laws and everything started to be put on cannabis. So you see this ebb and flow of it. And I think once more people really understand that, and then they start to understand, what effects cannabis can and can't have on their body and how individual it is, they start really feeling less stigmatized by the use and more purposeful in their use. And then that can help have these kind of conversations where people start tripping up of like, well, actually, I have a cannabis beverage after work to unwind. And that's what starts to normalize it the more we talk about it.
Right,
Truly.
right. And that's why I talk about it a lot. I've had one gentleman kind of look down his nose at me. Oh, you just work with cannabis business because you want to get high. And I was like, well, no. Actually, um, it's not why I work with them. I work with cannabis businesses because I see an underserved market. And I also believe that it was, as a believing Christian, I think it was put on the earth for a reason. We should be using it for its intended purposes, which seems to be to heal, as well
Absolutely.
as the fibers and the ability to fix nutrients in the soil. It's such a wonderful plant that
It's
I'm.
all encompassing, which is why I think it's such a beautiful plant, which is why I love explaining about it, because once you understand all of these facets that it can do and help with, and it's remarkable in my opinion. And so to be able to help people see that is a journey that I'm really passionate about. And much to your point, so many of the people that I know who are cannabis consumers are mothers, fathers, friends, neighbors, CEOs, CFOs, etc., surfers, everything in between, you know? So it's so widely used. And I do think a lot of negativity and dispersion has been cast against it. But what I see is, like so many other things, a lot of people coming to it for various reasons, but especially during this time, with a lot
Uh-huh.
of curiosity and seeing and wanting to know how they can integrate it into their life, usually for pain and sleep primarily.
Yeah, I think as we're talking about it more, like you said, then some of the stigma will go away because people who use it typically don't talk about it much, except to other people that use it. And the people that use it for performance or for mental health or for physical health, for that matter, keep it kind of close to their close to their hearts. You know, they don't talk about it too much because of the stigma. And I think I have thought that outlawing a plant was ridiculous since the 80s. I'm just giving away my age, but I remember going on a senior class trip in the middle of the 80s, and someone had sparked up in the bathroom. And at the time, I didn't consume it all. I was a very straight arrow as a kid. No smoking, no drinking, no fooling around, no, not a partier. And the teachers flipped out. And I remember thinking, it's a plant.
Yeah.
These kids are chopping tobacco all summer, and you're worried about a joint.
Yeah.
This doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
So, and then I've heard the stoners are stupid stereotypes. I'm like, well, really? Ask them to convert grams to ounces. And they can do it in their head.
Right. No, it's wild to see how stereotypes can just be so pervasive, you know,
Yeah.
and really just last for a long, long time. That's why I am so supportive of anyone who does feel comfortable and is in the safety of being able to be open about their cannabis consumption and what it does for them. I know a lot of people can't. And so I do think it's important for those who are in the space where they can to be able to talk about it, to be able to talk about it, um, and be able to have that taken with the same seriousness as people talk about meditation or other remedies that help them with mental health or anxiety or sleep and so forth like that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really, I mean, we as a civilization, we as a species grew up along cannabis.
Hmm.
So it doesn't have any negative side effects other than the very, very rare one of if you already have a tendency to schizophrenia, it can
Right.
trigger it.
Yeah.
But you already have to be schizophrenic.
Right. There has to be an underlying condition, and then in which case cannabis, and especially synthetic cannabis, which is a real problem on the
Yeah.
market, and it's a very different animal, but a conversation worth approaching. Yeah, unless you have that as an underlying issue, typically speaking, the most negative reaction you'll have if you don't have an underlying mental issue is going to be either just a really adverse reaction, like your body does not need cannabis, the endocannabinoid system, you have homeostasis, and so it just has a adverse reaction to it, and that could be just not feeling well, all the way to feeling lightheaded or sometimes even nauseous. But typically, that's the most. No one has ever died of like overdosing on
Right.
cannabis or anything like that in the history of cannabis, which is, wonderful. I think when you look at it and we're able to look through so many lenses in retrospect, which is the beauty of being able to do that. But I think when you look at cannabis and all of these drugs, and this is one of the things I talk about when I talk to people as the weed doula, you have these two clumps of drugs that I put in. You have alcohol, cocaine, things of that nature that I call your alter ego drugs, because usually when you ingest them or you consume them, it takes you out of yourself and makes you like your super version self, maybe more risky, maybe more this, that, and the other. Then I have what you call your ego less drugs, which are typically, DMT, cannabis, things like that, things that are typically more nature bound. And what they find is when you consume those drugs, depending on the amount you do, it takes away your id, your ego. And that's what allows us to have that shift in perception where maybe we see things differently, maybe we have more clarity, maybe something suddenly comes to us and we feel more resonant with it because our ego isn't kind of keeping us in a very safe comfort zone that we're used to, and we're allowed to just shift a little bit and see things from a different angle. And so that's typically what drugs do. And I think on a very spiritual level, that has been attacked because when people are able to reflect and connect and shift their perspective and be open and be very typically loving and very responsive to community, that jeopardizes capitalism, that jeopardizes so many different things that just go in stark opposition to being able to sit in self-reflection and think of things from a more communal perspective.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I almost think that some of this is fueling the so-called conspiracy theories that go around. Is we are using cannabis, and it does change our perspective, and now we can kind of sit back and go, what's the government doing to us? And do we want them to do it to us?
Yeah.
You know,
And
and
the plant is so sacred, there's two types of people who are in the cannabis industry. A lot of us say in the industry, which is like you have the people who really uphold the sacredness of the plant because it's, a place of gratitude for what it can do on a medicinal and a recreational level. And then you have, people who are in it, on the corporate side of things. And there's nothing wrong with blending that in, but it is a kind of a path, I guess I'll say, of like, what do you really support? Do you support the plant and its efforts and making it accessible? Or do you support primarily making it profitable? And sometimes the two go along and sometimes they don't. And so you get in this kind of mindset. But as it is, the plant is just really beautiful. And so people coming to the plant for exploration, for help, for recreation, tend to have this kind of I'd say outlook, if you will, where it is more reflective, I'd say, and more at home with wanting to figure out ways to connect to the earth and stay grounded to plant and really support that. And so, to your point, that can, when you're sitting around smoking or and vibing, when you start realizing the power of the plant and the earth and medicine and things like that, what happens to your consciousness around productivity and how things are currently going and control access and things like that too, because
right,
access to plant is also very big within the cannabis industry as well. Who has
yeah,
access to it?
yeah. I think everybody should have access to it, and I understand the concerns about children,
Of course, yeah.
but I also think they're probably a little overblown. I just was reading a bunch of the current hype, of oh yes, toddlers are going to the emergency room because they ate an edible, and I'm going, give them a drink of water and put on Bluey and let them just settle down. That's all the ER is going to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's that comes into so many things of like, well, if that's the parenting style, then the parenting style also probably exists along alcohol being out and
Uh
gun,
huh.
and different things like that too. And do we talk about it in the same way that we do cannabis? Because all of that is,
And we
you know,
don't, and that's what just baffles me.
yeah,
Is we don't talk about cannabis is perceived to be so much worse than alcohol, and yet I have a lot of friends that are dying of alcohol poisoning,
yeah.
long-term alcoholism, and I know nobody ever that has died of using too much cannabis.
Yeah, I mean, you can thank the lobbyists for that.
Mhm.
The alcohol lobbyists have had a really big hand in some of the attitudes we still have, especially the pervasive ones around cannabis versus alcohol. Um, Obviously, with any developmental aspect of child growing into adult, you want to be mindful of introducing any kind of drug or anything like that.
Absolutely.
And I think everyone's on board with understanding that. It's just like in the same way that kids have access to alcohol, which, I remember drinking before I was legal, and same thing with cannabis too, about the same age. And they usually do start up about the same age. Um, and so I just always find it interesting when people push these storylines, which do have some truth in some aspects to it, but also a lot of hype, to your point. Like, especially around Halloween, like people are going to insert drugs in candy and your kid's going to have a drug filled, candy cane or whatever.
Never happened.
Well,
I
what
think
addict?
someone is like mistakenly put an edible in a kid's bag,
I'm
but
sure that that has happened. I'm sure that that's been some sort of access point, but what addict is giving away their drugs for
exactly,
like, I've just never
exactly.
heard of that. So
Do
again,
these
it's like,
people know how much edibles cost? And
right.
where are these neighborhoods? I want to go trick or treating there.
Right. And also it'd be pretty well known, like, hey, this candy from this house gave me this kind of feeling. Now
Yeah,
we've tracked it back
maybe
here.
don't go trick or treating at Tommy Chong's house.
Right. So I just think like, when we start breaking it apart, we're like, oh yeah, that makes less and less sense. That's probably not as
Yeah,
true as, and this
yeah.
has been going on since like the 70s, this kind of story that comes around Halloween every
It's like a
single.
razor blade in the apple. Never
Yes,
happened, but we're
exactly.
terrorized with it every year.
Exactly. Exactly.
So,
So it's just, and that's what I try to get people who are very apprehensive about consumption, but are wanting to come to it, usually again through sleep or pain, is like a lot of the stuff you've heard has been hyped up, has
hmm
been over glamorized, underplayed, all these different aspects. Like the fact that COVID and CBD was highly studied in places like Canada and other places, and a deep connection for being preventative with stronger cases of COVID, habitual CBD use. So that's underplayed. Whereas like drugs in the apple for Halloween is overplayed, And so it's like really
yeah,
being able to
yeah,
listen to it with a critical ear and being like, what does make sense about this? What doesn't? Who benefits from me thinking this? And so forth and so on. And that's what I try to introduce as a part of my advocacy with intentional and conscious consumption is like really start to question it and look at it as the business, because so many people have lost their lives in this business and so many people are still sitting in prison in this business. And so you really have to look at it through an ethical consumption lens of like, how did my cannabis get here? Who is it sourced from? Who put the work and time into it? Is it an ethical practice? And so on and so forth.
yeah, yeah. And it always seems like you said, people have lost their lives over it. People are still in jail over it. There's a gentleman, I believe in Louisiana, who's serving like a life sentence because it was his third conviction for having a joint.
Right.
And
And
I
that's what,
just was, and to make it worse, on the enforcement side, if you look like me, you're probably not getting arrested. But if they look like
absolutely.
you, they probably are. And I don't
Absolutely.
think that's right either.
No, and that's how, same as it ever was, which is heartbreaking. And that's one of the stances I took against the company that I previously worked for, is just because I'm like, there are people who are looking like me sitting in prison, and there are people who are predominantly white who are profiting off of this business now. And there's not enough being done to get the people who are in prison who carved out this industry and created the blueprint for it
Right.
out of prison before we start profiting from it. No one should be sitting in prison in a state that has legal cannabis, who has been there
Not
for
for
a cannabis thing.
possession. Certainly
Exactly.
not for possession. I mean, if they did something violent,
That's a
you
different
can lock
story.
up.
And I understand
That's a
that.
different story. But just for the use or possession of cannabis,
Yeah.
it's ridiculous.
And I dare say, and this is why so much of this country's government will fight against looking at reparations and things like that, because it's like, even for the violent offenses, and I think this is a really important point, if you strip a people of resources and ability to move and prosper and uh, be able to take care of themselves and have self-determination, if you constantly remove those access points and you create a system where violence is going to be the mainstay for how you take care of yourself and drug dealing illicitly, can you blame those people for resorting to exactly the situation that you've created that they have to survive in? And so when we look at the harm from the war on drugs and how intentional it was, you have to integrate that understanding into, even in violent circumstances, what, and I'm not trying to negate anyone's choice to be violent, but what situational and environmental circumstances were so intentionally orchestrated to create that situation and perpetuate that situation. And there's a couple of movies that I really like about it, but one of them is Kill the Messenger with
Oh, okay.
Jeremy Renner. It's a true story about Gary Webb, who wrote for the San Jose Mercury. And he uncovered a story and blew the lid off of the CIA's involvement in getting narcotics into the hood and creating these pathways where narcotics were sold. Because you have to realize cocaine and crack are the same thing,
Yes,
but they're handled entirely different because of the demographic that they typically serve are kids.
exactly. Exactly.
And so when you start looking at that and you realize, wow, these drugs are, sentenced at this amount because the demographic is getting busted for that versus this and that. And that's part of also the history of it too, of like cannabis was so illegal until you started having predominantly white college kids in the 60s overwhelmingly be public about smoking it. And then laws starting to change. Same thing with psilocybin. Now that you have predominantly upper crust white kids, Berkeley and so forth like that,
Mm-hmm.
experimenting with
It
psilocybin,
legitimizes it because
and the
it's
laws are
it's
coming
used.
off the books to make it not as harmful and stuff like that. And so you look at these disparities between like meth and fentanyl versus heroin, and you still see it play out in the drug sentencing. And to your point, people who look like me are getting sentenced harder for the
Mm-hmm.
same type of usage than people who typically look like you. And so
Yeah.
when you look at the system that's created and you realize it's an ecosystem, and you pull any one part and it attaches to another, and so you have to solve for that before you get to this, and
Mm-hmm.
you realize it's a pretty ornate ecosystem that's been built upon for a long time.
Yeah, and the really annoying thing to me, I grew up being told I should be colorblind. That doesn't matter what color someone's skin is. What matters is what's in their heart, and I believe that. Um, and then I look and I see how people of color. Two of my kids are half Mexican,
Hmm.
and they've struggled because one, they're walking around with a blonde, blue-eyed mom, and people are
Hmm.
wondering what
What's
the
the
heck,
deal? Yeah.
what's the deal? And also because they kind of get the racism on both sides.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the Mexicans, their Mexican family thinks they look too white, and the white people think they look too Mexican. And I'm sure that's something that you probably can relate to. Um,
Absolutely. And it's, again, it's just like these systems that are created to make you internalize that and have to kind of go the path of least resistance a lot of times, which is
uh,
submitting to white supremacy in order to survive. And so you see this play out in so many different ways, and it's really heartbreaking to see. And
yeah, and it's not the your white neighbor that's perpetuating it. It's the politicians. It's the judges, and at least I hope it's not your white
yeah.
neighbor perpetuating it. Um,
Yeah, yeah, I mean, so often it is, but to your point, it's at I mean, it's systemic. That's what we mean when we
yeah,
say it's
it's
systemic.
systemic.
It's the judges, it's the cops, it's the DAs and so forth and so on, and it's heartbreaking. And a lot of people got confused, like when Biden signed off on releasing federal cannabis offenders, and people are like, okay, great, and not too many people realized at that level, like that's about 4,000 ish people who were released, and that is a great start, but most people are locked up at the state level. And so when we
Exactly.
look at that, that's an industry. That's slavery by another name. That
That
is
that
free
is school to
labor and
prison
indentured.
pipeline.
Exactly. The 13th Amendment. And so we're looking at, and I think we can be honest enough to see the world through adult lenses of, there are people who are highly invested at creating more and more money for their shareholders through any means necessary.
Hmm.
And what that's had a result of is realizing slavery is a very lucrative business. And so when it was outlawed, how can it be rebranded so that it's legalized again? And how can it
Right.
be, like firefighting, prisoners who are firefighters making less than $2 a day,
Yeah.
helping fight, all the fires in California and so forth, getting out of prison and not being able to commute that and use that as experience that could get them hired as a firefighter.
Yeah.
And that's
That's
insane.
crazy to me.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that if you have a felony, I can't hire specific. I certainly can't hire anyone that's done white collar crime because
Yep.
we're or
Yep.
violent crime. I have to be very careful if I'm going to allow someone to work for me that has a criminal record.
Yeah.
But cannabis use is not on my list of things to avoid an employment agreement for.
part of my dream for Collective High, and I do have big dreams for it, is to create a foundation that can work specifically, at least one part of it, um, working with people who have been in the prison system for cannabis related offenses and helping them get jobs, like placing them with like really good qualifying jobs while also fighting laws that prevent people who have been in the system from turning around and getting qualified jobs that they could absolutely be a part of and deserve to be a part of. And having that two-way system that really does the work on one side while also offering help on the other side.
Yeah, that would be just wonderful because I have known so many kids of all races, honestly, that have gotten caught up young.
Yeah.
And usually it's cannabis.
Yep.
Almost every time it's been drugs or drug paraphernalia.
Yeah.
Um, and then they can't seem to get out.
And the system isn't designed for them to
And
get
it's
out. Like,
designed for that.
when more and more people realize the history of police now originated from slave patrol catchers back then, and you realize that it has become a profitable industry to the point where several states have been sued by the private prisons they have, that they haven't offered enough people to their prisons. Like, they haven't arrested enough people. I know Arizona has had this lawsuit. I think another couple of states have had similar lawsuits, and where the private prisons have actually sued the state because they have said, you have not given us enough people for our private prison. That's a problem.
Wow. I didn't know that. I had no, I mean, private prisons are a problem to me to start with because I just don't think it's
Absolutely.
something that should be a private business.
Much of the stuff that's been privatized should not be privatized.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that, right? Like, healthcare should not be privatized, like schooling should not be privatized. These vested interests in the community that should be shared by everyone should not be privatized.
Yeah.
And we're
Schooling
seeing that,
should be paid for by the parents. I
yeah,
hope
by the
so.
parents, by the state, by the, like, and that's the problem with privatizing everything that we're seeing and at least starting to see right now. And so when you have a system that is built on making sure that people go to prison so that it can have free labor, so that it can give shareholders more money, you're vested in trying to find people to feed that system. And that's exactly what we
Absolutely.
have, which is why there are more Black men in prison now than were ever held as enslaved during chattel
Hmm.
slavery.
And
That's
that's
because,
such a tragedy. It's
hmm,
just such a tragedy.
yeah,
The data says that most of the violent crime is committed by Black men. However, it's only the young Black men. And it's because they don't have a father. And they don't have a father because dad sparked up a joint or he sold some weed or he sold a crack rock or something and he got caught. And it probably wasn't anything real major.
it's several things too, because at the same time you have wage stagnation that has plummeted
But
for
that's
Black America since 1974. We have not increased our wages whatsoever. So you have, again, less and less resources. If and there's a beautiful study I think they did in Sweden. I forget when they did it, but it's called the something of deviance, the relativity of deviance, I believe.
okay.
And they did this study that in a country such as Sweden, if you give people opportunity, so YMCAs that are fully, vested in, and great schooling and putting the money into the community and so forth like that, if you give people resources, about 90% of the population will do good, and they'll be self-sufficient, and they'll self-determine, and they'll do good things, and they'll pour back into the community. About any 10% population you're just going to have who is not going to be able to get it together, or they're going to struggle, or they still will choose crime even if resources have been given. So about 90% of any population is going to try to do good, do right, so forth. So again, when we look at this, like, the father's removed because, again, that's a slavery
Huh?
holdover. Remove the man from the house, disrupt the family union. You weaken a system and a community when you disrupt the family. So when you have automatically targeting Black men to go to prison, then you have disruption of the family, then you have wage stagnation, then you have, XYZ. Then also, a lot of people don't know, but like, when the father comes out of prison, you can't have them in the home. That violates
Right,
parole.
because now he's got a
So
record.
you're still continuing to break up the family and pour out resources. And not a lot of people know is, when you're out of prison, you have to pay the prison back. You have to basically pay back while you were there. So, and if you don't have a job and if you miss that payment, boom, you're back in. And that's why
I
recidivism
didn't
is
know
so
that.
high. it creates an impossible situation. You can't go back home. You can't get a job. You can't miss this payment. What are you going to do? You can't collaborate with the people who you just got out of prison with, who would have your back and understand and allow you to stay at their place and help support. So there's no support. So what happens when you have no support? You're going to turn to crime.
Well, you're going to
Turn.
have to. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes
And
sense.
so it's this evil system that's been created to self-perpetuate and run on a smooth oil, And so we have to disrupt it. When we think of like abolition, we have to disrupt it from so many different angles
Hmm.
because it is coming from so many different angles.
Yeah, yeah. LBJ, I think, was the engineer of all that. Because if I remember my history correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, before the '60s, before LBJ, the black family was solid. In fact, blacks had a stronger family unit than the whites. Um, and then he introduced all
So
this changes and
yeah, so it
destroyed.
goes hand in hand. It goes a little bit before him, and this is what I find so interesting about the history. So I told you before the first cannabis law was 1635, 1639. Every farmer had to have it. The next law that was put on the books around cannabis is again turn of the century, like almost a couple hundred years to the date later, 1930 something. Where now, if you have any amount of cannabis on you, you go to prison for life. So you have to have it. It's so essential. Now, if you have any of it, you're going to jail for life.
That's
At
crazy.
the same time, you have a man named Harry Anslinger.
Uh-huh.
He is the godfather of the carceral state. Like this is so much of his workings from back in are actually like happening now still. So he was basically the head of what is now like the DEA. It wasn't the DEA back then. And there's another good movie I think everyone should see if you want to understand his mindset and how he operated, which is The United States versus Billy King.
Oh, okay.
Excuse me, Billie Holiday. And it talks about how Harry Anslinger had such a hate towards the Black community in general. So jazz musicians, especially, he's quoted as saying, "Marijuana gives darkies the impression that they're equal to the white man, and that's why it's a problem." So if you go back and listen to like Fats Domino and all these people, you can hear them talk about this man and the FBI rolling up, and then this, that, and the other. And so you have this man who is determined to use the incoming Mexican Revolution and jazz musicians and lump them all together and say this whole demographic is bad. Marijuana is the reason why. At the
And
same
that's the
time,
whole reason they renamed it marijuana is to give it that weird
that
Spanish
weird
name.
exotic,
Scary.
yeah, yep, that immigrant, they're sending their worst over. Same kind of thing we're hearing echoed today. At the same time, you have Hearst, as in Hearst magazine. He had just bought all of this land to turn trees into his newspaper. Hemp threatened that whole industry for him and threatened to put him out of business. And so he needed a way to demonize hemp. We'll call it marijuana. Now he can use his newspapers to demonize the immigration, marijuana, jazz musicians, everything. And so they teamed up together to really have this two-part media and politic and, carceral state really attack cannabis from that form. And so that's where reefer madness and all these things start coming in, and people start really associating a lot of racist propaganda with cannabis. And that's really where the stigma emerges.
Yeah, yeah. I remember hearing about LBJ. Of course, he's before my time, but hearing about LBJ saying, we implement these policies, I'm going to have these people voting Democrat for the rest of their lives. And I was like, or for the next century. And I was going, it's just wrong. That's just wrong to engineer a whole population to set them up to fail because you want votes.
Yep.
I just don't get
And
it.
and that's why you have to, especially with any lens, I'd say anywhere in the world, when something happens, you have to always look at it from who benefits from this happening,
Hmm.
who is harmed from this happening,
Right,
and what does that mean not only for me and my communities, but the population at large, and how will things shift because of that. And I think when people start really looking at their cannabis through that lens, a lot will shift as far as reform around how prisoners are still in prison for this plant and this industry that isn't necessarily booming, but is fighting to have the right to boom,
right.
while people are still sitting in prison in the midst of all this happening. So I think a lot of, I talk about karma all the time. I think a lot of the karma for why this industry is so all over the place and volatile is because it hasn't dealt with the way in which it created itself off the backs of certain people. And so until it really contends with that, it's going to continue being volatile, I think.
I think you're probably right. And I just really would like to see the states release the prisoners that are there for simple possession. There's no purpose. There's nothing good that comes out of it unless you own the prison.
Yeah. And
Um, or if
that's
you're
shareholder
tapping
wealth.
into that slave labor market. And I don't like hearing about that for anybody of any color. I'm just maybe I'm just as too much of an optimist, but I expect people to treat me the way I treat them. And
Yeah.
so I try to treat everybody with respect and kindness. And then I'm
Yeah.
baffled when people don't.
Don't. Yeah, I know. That was one of the hardest lessons learning as like growing up into adulthood is that just because I approach someone that way does not mean that they have that in
It
their
doesn't
heart
mean they're going to
to
return
treat me
it.
that way. That was very shocking for some reason. And I think to the point of when you were mentioning it before of like being colorblind, I remember learning like someone's retort to that being like, why do you have to pretend not to see color in order to treat me fairly? And I think in order for us to get out of where we're at, we're gonna have to start seeing each other in the full spectrum, which is another cannabis term, in the full spectrum of who they are, so that we can be fully honest about where we're at, who is experiencing what, who is the privilege of not experiencing that but wants to be aware of that, so that we can really shift in all of these planes. Because even beyond cannabis reform, we have so many different communities who are suffering right now, who are, primed to go to a place like Hop City, should they start expanding that front. And so it's like we have to have different communities join together. And I think cannabis reform is a beautiful way because so many people, to our point, consume cannabis. And so it brings a lot of people together who normally maybe wouldn't. I remember just one funny example of it. This is a long time ago. I'm about to date myself, but Outkast, Goody Mob, Dungeon Family had a concert in Atlanta that let out at the same time as a Fish concert.
Uh-huh.
And so everyone was just in the parking lot jamming and having a good time and smoking and you could just see it and you're like, I love that so many different walks of life are here right now. And the common denominator is like music and joy and community
Uh-huh.
and cannabis. And everyone was just having a really great time. And so I think in this really holistic way, cannabis brings people together, and it's a really great point in which people can connect on to be like, hey, this needs to change. There's some stuff that is wrong with this industry as it currently is, and we care enough about it to just set it right.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. I just watched Grass is Greener not too long ago. And I
Okay.
love that Snoop Dogg was saying, you put a bottle of whiskey in a room of guys that hate each other, it's not going to be a good outcome. You put a bag of weed in a room with a bunch of guys that hate each other and they smoke it, they're going to come out best friends.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. And when I talk about being colorblind, I don't mean I don't see you as a black woman. I see you as a woman
Mm-hmm.
who looks differently from me, but
Mm-hmm.
who deserves the same kindness and respect and dignity as anybody else. So
Absolutely.
I'm more interested in knowing who you are beyond the color of your skin.
Yeah.
Of
And I
course,
think
that's
that's
going to
so
inform your experiences, so that gives me something to learn from because you have experiences that I'll never have.
absolutely, and vice versa. And I think that's the thing. It's like that is ideally the next step we get to is where we get to just meet each other for who we
Hmm.
are. I think we've got this other aspect that we have to deal with before we can get there. And so and conversations
Yeah,
like this are so important and eye-opening because it allows not only us to hear each other's experiences, but anyone listening to this to be like, wow, that's eye-opening, I didn't know that, or wow, I hadn't thought about that from that perspective. And that's I think the magic of conversation and community is being able to sit in on words of wisdom from someone else whose life we've never experienced, but get to have it open up our mind and our heart to the possibility of another experience that might not look anything like ours.
right. And the other thing I've noticed, the media is constantly trying to divide us.
Hmm.
Um, my parents once went on a road trip, and the media at the time was really pushing race baiting, really. They were trying to say that white people should be terrified of every black people that comes along. And of course, I grew up in the South, or at least in Kentucky, which is kind of South.
Yeah.
Um, it was never my experience. And my parents went on a road trip and they got back and they said, the media's wrong. Everybody we spoke to of every color of the rainbow has treated us with nothing but respect. So don't
Yeah.
listen to what they're saying. Most people are
Yeah.
very nice people. The
Yeah.
vast majority are very
The
nice
vast
people.
majority really are. And it can be so hard to believe that, especially in the world of social media where things get amplified and things get blown up. And, you always have to be mindful of the people who do make money off of people's anger and
Yeah,
hate and
yeah,
fear. There are a lot of industries that would collapse overnight if people really started loving themselves and loving their neighbor.
that's so
Um,
true.
like overnight. And so I constantly think of that when I'm buying makeup or doing anything where I'm like, my dollar matters. This is how I vote and this is how I stand behind things. So is this company really about the things and the values that I care about, or do they not? Do they oppose that? Am I buying into that? And so sometimes that can help alleviate some of the stuff. But I do think the more people talk, the more people meet, you naturally start to see how alike you are.
Yeah,
Do so if you
yeah.
want to. Sometimes if you really don't want to, you will not see
Sometimes
it.
people just look at the differences.
They'll have confirmation bias, and that's how manifesting works too. If we think about
Yeah,
like attraction, like if you have a confirmation bias that you are deeply invested in holding, your beliefs and everything are going to just go support exactly what you see, and you're only going to bring in experiences that reaffirm what you believe in. But I think sometimes that's the beauty of, like, if you even just have a tiny inkling of a question of like, wait, is there something different out there? Like, is there an experience that I'm overlooking? Like, life situations, things, circumstance will provide a way for you to see that and experience that. And
right.
I think that's what's so beautiful about doing something like a road trip and really just seeing a vast amount of
Uh-huh.
people and land across different spaces, is you get to see we are so alike in so many ways.
Yeah.
And
And they're the kind of people that would talk to everybody.
yeah. And to your point, media has and has been a long standing tool for division, and it's really sad, and it's really effective how sad, and that's what makes it so sad in my opinion. But when you are able to just break bread with people, you see the
Hmm.
commonality. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. I have very seldom met someone that I just couldn't like. And it has
Yeah,
nothing to do with, it has to do with their attitude and not the color of their skin.
their vibe, their
Yeah.
actual like
So,
energy or what they believe in. Or and I've even to that, like, I've met people who, like, we have very different beliefs, but if we can be respectful to each other and
mhm,
actually have a place of curiosity, not confirmation, we can even talk about things that we disagree and still have a beautiful conversation, as long as it's not rooted in you not believing in my right to exist. Like, that is not something that we can agree to disagree on. But in terms of other things of like, oh, I do or I don't believe in like the death penalty, or I do or I don't believe in, this other stuff. There's been so many times where I've had deep conversations with people I hold very different beliefs in, but because there's a level of, I just want to share and I want to hear you and I want to be heard, and we can do that, we can have these really cathartic conversations, whether we see eye to eye or
exactly. We don't have to agree on everything. We just have to talk.
yeah. And cannabis is such a tool for that, because usually if you start smoking or imbibing, you're going to be chatty. You're going to want to talk about the deep philosophical things, you tend to go very
It's going to
deep.
come to
So
your mind.
exactly, exactly. So yeah, and I think that's what's so beautiful about consumption when it is intentional and it's through the lens of healthy curiosity and integration.
Yeah, 100%. So what were you doing? What are you doing with Weed Doula? What is that?
The Weed Doula, yeah. So I originally started it because I realized, whereas Collective High answers to like more of a social party workshop format, there was still a lot of misinformation on the market that I wanted to address on a more communal, but also more like education centered way. So the Weed Doula was started as a way for me to work with people one on one or in small groups or keynotes where I could talk about the history of cannabis, 10,000 BC to present, or
Okay.
talk about what is the endocannabinoid system and how do terpenes affect that, and just really give like purely educational resources and being able to work with people to find the right cannabis for their needs. Um, and then one-on-one is really hard, like to be able to do these consultations. It does require a lot because I'm basically working with someone through an integrated program that I created to help them realize what cannabis is specifically for their need if they want something for focusing or this or that. And then I help them find those products close to where they are so they can have them delivered or go to that. So I still do help with that time to time, but have figured out a way to basically broaden that, and that's really applying myself into keynote speaking so that people can get a lot more information at one time, and starting to do
Awesome.
on-demand videos that address like very specific digestible things, and really working to build that out so that people can theoretically like they just want to kind of get an A through Z background on cannabis and what it is. They'll be able to digest that in a way that feels resonant to them.
I love that. I love pushing out as much education as we possibly can. So that's part of the reason for doing this. Um,
Absolutely.
everybody, like I said, I keep telling people, everybody I know that uses cannabis is the tops of their field. They are the best in their office. They're the
Yep.
best. And
Yep.
they almost use it, at least the people I know, to slow down their minds.
That's
In
usually
fact, I
what you
remember
see.
Louis Armstrong saying the same thing. If he was on cannabis when he played, there were more spaces between the notes because of
Yeah.
the perception of time,
Yeah.
and so it made him a better player.
Yeah.
He said,
And I think that's really what we're seeing is like, especially as people start to come out and feel more comfortable talking about their usage, is we're seeing how it's helping people in a lot of ways, whether it's an athlete and it helps them with muscle recovery, or it's someone who needs, like for me, ADHD. It was a game changer when I realized I love using THCV and CBG together, two cannabinoids that really work for helping me be able to focus while still being calm. Um, and that made me rework my day because now I wasn't getting like lost in like a Twitter, whatever for an hour. I was able to just like, okay, no, I found the one thing I need. Now I'm back doing what I need. And
"This
so
just made my
we're
day."
seeing, yeah, we're seeing how people are using it in all these very personal, individual ways, and that is disrupting the narrative that people who are stoners are lazy or XYZ, and really seeing, oh wow, I didn't know that this person used it before they did this thing that I really respect them for. And so
Right?
it's lovely to see that.
It really, really is, and it's lovely to see people talk about what they do when they're high. Yoga is a big thing that I've seen yoga studios pop up.
Yeah,
That's Ganjo yoga. Come in, hit the
that's what
bong,
Collective
and then
High
we're
is
going to be
doing.
mindful in our yoga practice.
Absolutely. There's an event that Collectify is doing in January. Again, like under the mindset of like how to start your year off with intention and how
Hmm.
to have a healthy, great, fun, abundant year. And so one of the events that I'm doing is a cannabis and yoga workshop. And so there's going to be journal writing, a sound bath, intentional joint rolling to really get people to
Cool.
understand that you can
To
fuse
put
your
your
cannabis.
intention into the joint. Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
to make
cool.
it really a whole like ritual, because that's how ancestrally it's been used. And so getting
Uh-huh.
people to incorporate and integrate that into their usage, I think is really important and makes it very synergistic. And so again, when we talk about this plant and its synergies and the entourage effect, getting people to understand like terpenes show up in rose petals and lavender and different items. And so when you combine that with your flower and you roll it, you can make a very tailored pre-roll. Like sometimes if I know I've had a very stressful day, I will take lavender leaves and roll it in my indica before I go to bed because it's very calming.
Hmm.
It's from linalool, which is a terpene that is very calming and so forth. So it helps me get into like a state where I want to go to sleep. And so getting people to connect all those dots and have them have fun with their cannabis, but in a way that feels educational, but in a way that feels experimental is really where Collective High sits. And then with the Weed Doula, like I said, it's very educational. I'm working with a company in New York, a dispensary, and they've hired me to help them with their delivery rollout specifically for the fun senior crowd and the demographic and
Cool.
getting them involved with different items and aspects, and really just integrating that in a way so that it brings it to them in a way that feels safe and exploratory so that they can,
Yeah.
have
I
a
think the
lunch.
seniors are going to be a great market because
Yeah.
they were the hippies of the
Yeah,
60s and 70s.
exactly.
They know the plant. They at least have heard of it.
Yeah.
Uh, and so for them to be able to come back onto it, it helped. It helped a friend of mine just before she passed. She had had a stroke and was bedbound, and I helped get her on THC, CBN, and CBG and CBD were all in the gummies. I explained to her, she was very, very religious.
Hmm.
Um, and so she wasn't really sure about it, but I explained what each compound does.
Yeah.
And within 3 days, she was actually able to get up and walk around.
Wow. Yeah, I believe it.
So, um, so that was just a really wonderful thing to see.
Yeah. And I think that's really where so much of this process happens is between close friends, between respected people, between someone you love and trust who can say, like, hey, I know you haven't previously thought about this as a possibility, but with some education and explanation as to what everything does, is this something that would interest you? And that is where I'm seeing so much of this transition take place for every age demographic, but especially, well, actually, I'd say across every age demographic because you trust your friend. Oh, you like this thing? It helps you sleep? Okay, I'll check it out. Like there's that third party, the original PR
Right.
of connectivity of like, okay, you vouch for it, I trust you. I'm going to
Hmm.
give this a shot or look into it or, so forth. And so
Right. Right.
having everyone be on that educated aspect where they could explain, here's what CBN, CBG, THC, here's what it does, and this is how it interacts with your system. That's my dream. So that whether you
I love
consume
it.
or not, you can have that educated experience enough to be able to talk about it and maybe help someone else who is open to it, who does not know, but from your information that you're able to relate to them, can integrate that into their life and really be life changing.
Hmm. Yeah, we had. In fact, I had another friend whose father was a vice cop, and then he developed cancer, and they got
Mm.
him on RSO. He was able to
Hmm.
live another couple of years after that, and he was going. I used to arrest people for this, and I don't. I couldn't do it again
Yeah.
because he. That's when he realized what the benefits are, and kind of going back to the beginning of our conversation when we were talking about Halloween and mixing drugs in with candy and all the alarmism that they give us.
Hmm.
Um, that seems to all come from law enforcement, and I don't think they think about the user's point of view, which is as mine. You know,
Yeah.
I don't want to give that away. I'll sell it, but it's too expensive to just give away,
Yeah. Who's giving RSO oil away? No one.
right?
Like I'd be like, whoa,
We're
this drop
looking.
of that is like worth $5. You know? So I do, and it is interesting because there have been so many stories similar where law enforcement has stepped up when they've been on the experiential end of needing
Mhm.
cannabis,
Yeah,
and understanding why it's okay from a user point of like, well, now I need it, so now I get it.
no, I
And
understand.
so that's
Yeah.
really one of the main things I want to do is, especially with cannabis, help people understand it before they have to come to it as a last option so
Hmm.
that they can understand why others might want to use it and not have judgment around that too, you
Yeah.
know?
That, and we used to have informed consent as an
Yeah.
important
Yeah.
um, foundation to our society. That if I know what it is, and I should know what the stuff is, what the
Hmm.
product is. I should know what it's going to do. I should know what the
Hmm.
potential side effects are, and then I can make a decision.
Yes.
And that decision may not be the same decision the government wants me to make,
Right.
but I can make a decision based
Being an informed,
on
consented
being
adult.
informed. Yeah, and right now
Mhm.
it feels to me like so much of the information that I need that I'm looking for is being hidden.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, I won't even try to pretty that up. It
It
absolutely
really
is, you know. America is so far behind in cannabis studies because they haven't allowed it. And so much of what you're seeing happen from state to state of why these industries are kind of in the ebb and flow of collapse and sometimes doing really well. A lot of people come to me, they're very confused, like, hey, my state, it's soaring in sales. Why is it on the other side of it, like, seem like it's collapsing? I'm so confused. And it's because you have people who are making these laws around usage and consumption who are either very out of touch with the consumer journey aspect of it, and or are partnered with lobbyists who are vested in not having it go smoothly because it disrupts their systems. And when you have people like that making laws, it suddenly makes a lot more sense for why
Okay.
things are going the way they're
Okay.
going. um, and so unfortunately you have not had the same amount of studying cannabis that you have in places like Canada and Israel, who have been studying it for close to half a century at this point. And that's everything from medicinal usage to recreational usage, just because, again, the laws that have been created have kept it so, I won't even go into the boringness of it, but it's kept it so inaccessible and unreliable. And so when you realize, like, you've had places that have had so much more extensive work and ability to connect with this plant and understand it and then make laws through that understanding, you look at our system and you're like, wait, what's going on? Why are we doing it this way? In what world?
With what other drug?
Yeah, exactly.
What other
Exactly.
drug was involved here? Because
Exactly.
everybody I know, like I said, and I have a small circle of friends. So when I say everybody I know, it's 5 or 6 people. It's a very small sample size. But I don't know anyone that intentionally goes and drives high. They know they're impaired, so they choose not to.
Yeah.
Um, which is different from, and there's the old joke: if you're drunk, you'll blow through a red light, and if you're stoned, you'll sit and wait for the stop sign to turn green.
Absolutely. You're like
Um,
driving 10 miles, 50 miles per hour, which can still be a danger, which is why we
because
don't
if you're going too slow,
recommend
it's
it.
still a danger,
Yeah.
but it's not as bad as just blowing through
Speeding excessively, not
speeding
realizing you're
or,
speeding.
or, or methamphetamines. We had an incident here in Utah where a gentleman was hidden, and he was white. I'll preface with that. He had had multiple drug offenses, and they were all hard drugs. It was methamphetamines, it was heroin, things that really aren't good for you. And he was racing around one of our communities, one of our more rural communities, and managed to go down this rural road at 120 miles an hour through 2 cattle fences and killed 2 3-year-old boys that were just playing in their own yard.
Oh my God.
And I was,
I'm so
of
sorry.
course, they blamed the drugs. I was like, no, it's the person.
Yeah.
The person. Why is he on drugs?
Yeah.
And more importantly, he was already shown to be a danger. Why is he
Yeah.
not in jail?
Yeah.
So I don't think using should be anybody's business but the person's.
Yeah.
But the behaviors,
Yeah.
that needs to be dealt with.
And that's what's so sad, devastating about our, I'll call it the injustice system, is that you hear stories constantly where someone who you would think would be a candidate to keep in jail or prison because they've shown
And they let them
continuous,
out.
and they let them out and then they harm again. And the people who love the person who they harmed is devastated because it's like, how is this person out? They've clearly shown tendency over and over and over and over again. And again, that's when we talk about resources. Back when I was saying before, you look at the environment in which it's being created, this like ecosystem of like
Mm-hmm.
profit and people back in, and you realize like the carceral state we have is not made to rehabilitate people and make people better. It is a profit system. And so therefore when someone who shows that they clearly have a behavioral issue where they're using drugs to cope or escape or violence or theft or things like that, we don't really have a system for them to be treated mentally to find out, well, what's causing this. Like there's no vested interest in that. It's like, can you work? Are you good enough to work when you get out? You can't. Okay, go back and be, free
And
labor.
continue to be incarcerated. Yeah.
Yeah. And, the recidivism rate keeps raising, I believe, in terms of people getting out and then going right back in. Used to be at 33%. That's a third of the people. A third
Yeah.
of the people are coming
And,
out of this are
and
going back in
why? I mean, why
because
did
there's
they
no
end up there to begin
resources.
with? And then
Yeah.
why do they have no support when they get out?
Because it's not made for that. Like
Well, yeah.
that's really what we have to contend with, is like they don't want that to happen, and therefore there's no resources being pointed towards that. Because when you look at certain other countries that do have those safety nets in place because they don't want their citizens to go through this like endless cycle, you start realizing like, okay, well then that has to be some level of intention for our system not to work like that and our system not to help like that,
I don't
So
know where they are in your drawer. I don't know where they are. Sorry, my husband came in for just a second.
you're good, you're good. um,
He's asking me
but
for things. I'm not going to
yeah.
do that right now.
No, you're totally fine. I was just basically saying, like, you look at other countries who do have these systems in place and you realize our country not having it is intentional at a certain point.
Yeah,
It's not, and it's action expressed as priority, and it's clearly not a priority to make sure that people aren't getting caught up in systems that brought them to prison in the first place.
yeah, and I don't know how to overcome that.
You have to have a different government. You have to have one that's not trying to privatize things and cares about the people and wants America to actually do really good. You should want not that many people to be in your prisons. Like, that's not an
Exactly.
industry
The
that you should be.
violent ones, for sure, they need to be somewhere, but then they need a way to. They need to be treated. They need to be worked with, and maybe prison's not the place for them. Maybe a mental health hospital is.
And you have to have a mental health hospital that again cares and it isn't privatized and not, so again, it's like all of the roads lead back to you have to care about the people. You have to care about the
Yeah,
planet, and you
and
have to be
too many
vested in it.
people care about profit over people.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's very
Profit's wonderful,
interesting.
and I love it, but I've never understood this. I'm going to destroy people to get what I want attitude that some people have.
I don't understand it either. And it seems to me so short sighted. And
Yeah,
I keep saying, like, we need to figure out a way to make peace profitable because at this point, I feel like that's the only way that's going to get attention towards moving us into like a better system and structure. Because if profit is
well,
the thing that it cared about the most, then how can we make it attached to longevity and staying here and being able to live on this planet?
well, I joke the war on drugs was so effective. I almost think we need to have a war on literacy. Maybe
Yeah.
people will smuggle books, and learn something.
And that is so intentional too. Populace that's not educated is so much easier to control with fear and coercion. When you have people who are educated and understand the history of things, they tend not to repeat that history. And
Right.
so you look at, okay, again, all roads leading back to Rome. Why is American education so in the gutter when
That's
we compare it
abysmal.
to other?
It is awful.
It's really bad. And that's not even, we're not even getting into like the school shootings and the environment that creates a chaotic system. Like, we're just literally talking about the
Right.
level of education.
We
Again,
drove through Memphis not too long ago, and my parents lived just a few hours north of Memphis. And as we were driving through, we were talking about some of the demographics that are there. Memphis is a very dangerous city. Um, and I looked up the high school graduation literacy rates. 25% or less could read at grade level. And they didn't break it out by race, but my jaw was on the floor.
yeah,
Fewer than 10% can do math.
yeah.
And I just was like, what? And then I hear about Oregon saying, oh, we're not going to do away with any sort of literacy or numeracy requirements for graduation. And I'm like, you're creating a disaster. We should be raising the bar for everybody. And then emphasizing to the kids, you have to know this is just stuff a normal human being should know. This is what you need to know just to function in society. You should know music. You should know something about music. You should know history. And more than you should get interested in history. History is one of my favorite subjects. It always has been. You need to understand, what really happened, and not just the winner's point of view.
Yeah.
And people just aren't. I was so shocked when my kids told me, my older kids, the younger two I homeschooled, but my older kids told me they didn't even cover World War II
Yeah.
in their history classes. And we had just come back from Germany. We lived there for 3 years. And I was like, wait, what? We didn't cover World War II?
It's,
To me, it's like not knowing about I think it was the 101st Massachusetts Regiment in the Civil War. That was the all black regiment that did so much. They were just so valiant in their
yeah.
fighting.
I think that's what's so scary is like if you aren't attached to younger kids and you don't know what they're going through right now, it's alarming. It's very alarming. The education system in America is alarmingly bad and just has been bad for a while and has been let to lapse for a very long time. And then you do compare it to, kids who have grown up in other countries and what they're learning and how school is prioritized above all else, and there are systems in place for tutorage and, you
Right.
know, it's really alarming. It's very alarming. And
It
then
feels
combine it
like
with
the
like,
teachers that I know are just kind of throwing up their hands going, well, what can you do?
well, well, and that's the thing I was going to say, like the teachers coming from a long line of teachers, they are being they're basically their hands are tied and they're asked to
Hmm.
fight. Like
Yeah.
it's unimaginably hard, especially because when I was coming up in like middle school, no, middle school, junior high to high school, No Child Left Behind was being implemented. And
Yeah.
that was considered
That seemed
absolutely
like a
fantastic.
disaster to me.
It was because basically again, it put the emphasis on the wrong thing. It didn't put the emphasis on the education. Let's make sure that these kids are educated. It put the emphasis on the teachers making marks. So they had to pass a certain amount of kids. And if they didn't, then the teacher would get in trouble. So the teachers just started passing people because you're like, you're not going to get me in trouble for putting me in a situation where I'm bound to fail because
Yeah. And all
there's
it did
not
was
enough
fail the
time.
kids.
So that happened for a while. And so people are
Hmm.
just passing through that have they didn't have the constitution to make that up and they didn't understand. And so then you're getting to like the GED portion or the testing at a high school and you're getting people who are basically failing for having like an eighth grade reading education or mathematics computation. And it just compounds after a while. And that's what's so scary about when you have resources to go fight in war, when you have resources to, always make sure that crime is up, but you don't have resources to pour into after school programs and tutoring programs. And
Well, the schools are very well funded. It's
yeah,
the administration
yeah,
they're getting the big bucks. And it's the teachers' unions that are, at least I think so. This is my perception from what I've read. It seems like it's the teachers' unions that are holding out. Randy Weingartner was the one that was trying to keep schools closed long after several states had opened because the teachers just didn't want to go back to work, or at least the
mhm,
union.
yeah,
And so I'm like, and it seems, again, there's a lot of different causes.
yeah,
People don't want to deal with the kids in the inner cities, and the parents think that their kids should be passed along whether they should be or not. And
yeah,
the teachers aren't getting the support from the parents that they used to.
yeah,
Um, and I don't know what all the causes are. I just know that I see all of these octopus tentacles that are causing our children to fail.
yeah. And be so ill-equipped to dealing with the rest of the world.
Yeah,
The rest of the world isn't failing just because we are, and
exactly.
that's a scary thing. And then add in AI, which is another whole conversation. And I think that's what's so hard is like seeing teachers not get rewarding salaries and then being asked on top of that to use their salaries to pay for half the things in their classroom. And then on top of that, being told maybe you should get a gun so you can protect yourself and your kids.
Yeah.
And then having a classroom go from like 25 students to 28 to 32 to 35. And it's just like we're
And
failing at every level.
without the tools to make them sit down and at least be quiet so the kids that want to learn can learn.
Yeah. Well, and also like let's be like totally real. If you talk to any of these kids, they are so aware of how cooked we are. And I
Oh
think
yeah.
that's what is happening in the classrooms when they're disrupting things and pushing back is like they are screaming for attention and help as a kid.
Uh-huh.
And the only way that they know how, because the planet is falling apart, the
Hmm.
government is falling apart. Like all of these aspects that they were promised would always be there for them are falling apart, and no one is addressing it as if it's
And
falling
they
apart.
know. I keep laughing.
You
I
know,
keep saying kids are way smarter than adults give them credit for. They'll live up to what you expect of them. So you better be aware of what you expect because they'll
absolutely.
live up to it. And if you expect them to be good, upstanding citizens that pay their bills and their taxes and grow businesses, then that's what they're going to be. If you expect them to be thugs and ratchet and ghetto, then that's what they're going to be. So, and they themselves, the kids know that they have more than that.
Yeah. And I think they're having an absolutely healthy response
Hmm.
to a crumbling society, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah,
And that's what's really hard to own up to is like, it's easy to be like, oh, well, the kids are just being so disruptive. And they are because they're screaming out for help because they're terrified right now. And no one's owning the elephant in the room. And we're all pretending like it's okay when there's like so much going on that's clearly not okay. And it's very scary. Then you get the teachers who are underpaid and understaffed, and just like it keeps replicating.
yeah. And then you get the crazy advice like, don't read to your kids because it gives them advantage over other kids. I'm like, where are these other kids? Bring them to my house. I'll read to them. Yeah,
Yeah. I hadn't even heard of that.
happily.
That's
I
so
have
wild.
books.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a real it's what's that game? Pick up sticks. It's where
Hmm.
you try to pick up one and then it's connected to another so you can't move that
Yeah,
one yet.
yeah.
And that's kind of what it is. And it's like I don't know if you read any Octavia Spencer, but Parable of the Sower is a book that takes place actually around this time, and she wrote it back in the 60s, which is just like
Is this the same
mind.
Octavia Spencer that's the actress? Or am
No,
I thinking, or does she have a different last name and I'm just
Octavia
conflating them?
Spencer, but Octavia Butler is the author.
Okay, okay.
Octavia Butler, pardon me if I said Spencer. Yeah, Octavia Spencer is the actress. Octavia E. Butler is the author, and she wrote several books. She's a prolific author, and one of them is called Parable of the Sower, and it's basically if you combine Brave New World, 1984, Handmaid's Tale, and like one other parable right now, and that's Parable of the Sower. And people are asking her like, how did you create this? Like, this is so wild that like you said this so long ago, and yet now we're seeing how it's moving in this way. And her whole thing was like, I basically looked at all of the major problems, like housing crisis and climate crisis and different things. I looked at all the major problems and I said, okay, what would happen if the government ignored it for another 30 to 40 years? And then I wrote the book from that perspective. And so it opens up now, and you're just like, I hate how horrifyingly accurate this feels,
Yeah.
but
I'm
it
going
is
to
an
have to
important.
go start reading her books. I love to read. I read 300 or something books a year.
Yeah. Read her book. Yeah. Read
Okay.
Parable of the Sower. My mom, it's interesting. My mom was reading it back in San Francisco, and she had to like put it down for a bit because it takes place like they walk through San Francisco during one part of it. And she just
Oh.
said it felt so disturbingly surreal that she just had to like regroup basically and
Hmm.
like start again. But I think that's what we're seeing. Like education has been falling apart for decades now. All these different industries, these different things have been for decades now. So it's not just going to be a simple solution of we do this and then boom, it's better over here. It's going to take as much work as it's taken to let all of this lapse, and I think that's where people get frustrated because they want a quick fix. They want one person in office to change the whole trajectory. And it's like, no, we've got to
It's
work
just not
together
possible.
and build a rainbow coalition of people and all work together to really work on this extensively, like our lives depend on it because they do.
Yeah, they do. They
Yeah.
absolutely do.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
thank you for being on the show. How can people reach you?
the best way to reach me is on the Collective High side of things. If someone's interested in membership or just learning more about what we do or how to support, they can go to collective-high.com or reach out to me directly at june@collective-high.com. We're also on Instagram at Collective High. And then for the Weed Doula, I'm june@theweeddoula.com, or you can visit my website, theweeddoula.com as well.
Okay. And we will put those links in the show notes so people can reach you.
Amazing. Thank you so
Thank
much.